You've been walking on an empty stomach every morning, and your belly fat hasn't moved. I want to tell you exactly why. Because after 21 years in metabolic medicine, I can tell you the problem isn't the walk. The problem is your insulin. And the two are connected in a way that almost nobody in the fitness world is talking about. Here's what the research suggests. Fasted walking, walking after an extended overnight fast, appears to shift the body's fuel preference towards stored fat rather than circulating glucose. But that shift depends almost entirely on one thing, whether your insulin levels have dropped low enough before you take your first step. And for most people over 60, they haven't. Not because you ate too much, because insulin stays elevated for longer as we age. And a chronically elevated insulin level, even modestly elevated, acts as a direct brake on fat release from your fat cells. The technical term is lipolytic suppression. What it means in practice is simple. You can walk for 45 minutes on what feels like an empty stomach, and your body may still be drawing on glycogen rather than belly fat. The mechanism is what this video is about. We're going to go through 5 specific strategies, ranked from foundational to genuinely powerful, that shift your morning walk from a glycogen burning session into an insulin-managed fat mobilization window. We go from number 5 to number 1. Number 1 will change how. What do you think about this? But first, leave a comment right now. Tell me your age and one question. Have you ever had your fasting insulin tested? Not fasting glucose, fasting insulin. I read every comment on this channel, and I want to know how many of you have been cleared by your doctor based on the wrong number. Number 5, getting your overnight fast long enough for insulin to actually clear. This is where most people make the first mistake, and it costs them the entire benefit of the walk. When we talk about fasted walking, we're talking about something more specific, allowing enough time overnight for circulating insulin levels to return to a true baseline. And that window is longer than most people assume. Here's the mechanism. After a meal, any meal, including a relatively small one, insulin rises to help clear glucose from the bloodstream. In younger adults, insulin typically returns to baseline within 4 to 6 hours. But research suggests that in adults over 60, this insulin clearance process takes measurably longer, due in part to declining hepatic insulin sensitivity and changes in pancreatic beta cell function. And here's the part that most people find genuinely surprising. That small evening snack you've been having, the crackers, the handful of nuts, the glass of juice at 9 p.m. may be the single most powerful thing working against your morning walk. Not the walk itself, not your metabolism. A snack you finish in 3 minutes. What this means practically is that an evening snack at 9 or 10 p.m. may mean you're still walking on elevated insulin at 6 a.m. Your fast looks like 8 or 9 hours, but your insulin profile may not reflect a true fasted state. The fat you're trying to mobilize, insulin is holding it in place. Even modest insulin elevation is sufficient to suppress HSL, hormone-sensitive lipase, the enzyme responsible for releasing stored fat from adipocytes. That's the real mechanism, not willpower. I had a composite patient, I'll call her Margaret, 64, retired administrator. She had been walking 40 minutes every morning for 2 years. No waist change. When I reviewed her habits, she was having a small glass of orange juice and 2 crackers at around 9:30 p.m. That was it. We moved her last food intake to 6:30 p.m., kept everything else identical. Within 8 weeks, she reported the first measurable reduction in her waistline since she had started walking. The practical guidance is this. Aim for 11 to 13 hours between your last food and your first step. Water, black coffee, and plain tea are acceptable. None of these produce meaningful insulin responses in most people. Set a consistent kitchen close time and Harr protect it. And the reason this matters even more than it sounds, and this is something I want you to carry forward through the rest of this video, is that everything else we discussed today depends on insulin having had enough time to clear. You can't outwalk elevated insulin. You can't outpace it. You have to wait it out. Moving on to number 4, and this is where the conventional fitness advice gets genuinely counterproductive for people over 60. Most people assume that walking faster means burning more fat. The evidence points in a more nuanced direction, and the mechanism behind it has everything to do with how aging changes your fat cells at the receptor level. Here's what we know. Fat mobilization during exercise is triggered largely by catecholamines, adrenaline and norepinephrine, which bind to beta-adrenergic receptors on the surface of fat cells and signal them to release stored triglycerides. At moderate exercise intensities, this signaling system works efficiently. At higher intensities, because glucose can be converted to energy faster than fat can be mobilized. That's the core principle. And here's what makes it specifically relevant after beta-adrenergic receptor sensitivity appears to decline with age. The same hormonal signal that mobilized fat efficiently at 35 is working at reduced efficacy at age 65. This means you need the conditions to be as favorable as possible, and pushing too hard works against those conditions. The practical target is moderate intensity, a pace where you're breathing noticeably but can still speak in full sentences. Exercise physiologists call this the talk test. You should not be comfortable enough to sing. You should not be gasping between words. That conversational zone, roughly 60 to 70% of your maximum aerobic capacity, is where fat oxidation from stored adipose tissue is thought to be most efficient during fasted exercise. Duration research on cortisol response races during fasted exercise suggests that extended sessions beyond approximately 30 to 40 minutes begin to produce hormonal signals. After 60, muscle preservation is non-negotiable. Sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle mass, is one of the most powerful drivers of metabolic decline. Don't want your morning walk working against your muscle mass. 20 to 35 minutes. Moderate conversational pace. That's the prescription. And this connects directly to number 3, which is about something that happens in your body before the walk even begins, and which most people are completely ignoring. Hydration. It's about triggering a specific hormonal response that primes your fat cells before you take your first step. Norepinephrine is one of the primary signaling molecules that stimulates those beta-adrenergic receptors on your fat cells we just discussed. Some research has examined whether water consumption itself produces a measurable acute increase in metabolic rate and sympathetic activity in healthy adults. The effect appears to be real, though modest. And after 60, modest advantages compound. Here's what makes this especially important for older adults. The physiological thirst mechanism becomes less sensitive with age. The practical consequence is that many adults over 65 are chronically mildly dehydrated without experiencing thirst. And dehydration, even mild, impairs fat oxidation directly. The mitochondria requires adequate cellular hydration. The practical protocol: 300 to 400 milliliters of water approximately 20 to 30 minutes before your walk begins. Temperature slightly cool, not ice cold. Some people tolerate a small pinch of mineral-rich salt. The sodium supports cellular electrolyte balance, which affects mitochondrial function. If you have hypertension or have been advised to restrict sodium, discuss this with your physician before adding salt. Now, I know exactly what some of you are already typing in the comments. Does my morning coffee count? Does black coffee break the fast? I get this question constantly. Here's the direct answer. Black coffee, no milk, no sugar, no cream, does not produce a meaningful insulin response in most dry people. The caffeine itself may actually support fat mobilization through sympathetic nervous system activation. So if your morning routine involves black coffee before your walk, that is not the variable undermining your results. The evening snack is. I want to be direct with you here. The hydration mechanism is real, but it's foundational. It creates the conditions for what comes next. And what comes next, number 2, is the strategy that I believe is the most underappreciated thing you can do to specifically target insulin resistance in your visceral fat tissue. Before I get to number 2 and after to number 1, which I believe will genuinely change your morning routine, I want to ask you to do something. Hit subscribe and ring the bell. Every week on this channel, we go through mechanisms that your 15-minute appointment doesn't have time to explain. And this community of people who actually want to understand what's happening in their bodies, not just follow instructions, that community is growing because of people like you sharing these videos. Number 2, what you do in the 5 minutes before your walk begins. I know that sounds almost too simple, but the physiological mechanism behind it is precise enough that I want to walk you through it carefully. Stored body fat cannot be burned in place. Before it can serve as fuel, it has to be released from the fat cell through a process called lipolysis, transported through the bloodstream, taken up into muscle cells, and then passed through the mitochondrial membrane for oxidation. That entire process requires enzyme activation. And the primary enzyme responsible is hormone sensitization is stimulated by catecholamines, by sympathetic nervous system activation, and by movement itself. Research on pre-exercise dynamic movements, controlled rotations and swings, produces a mild but meaningful autonomic nervous system response that can increase lipolytic readiness before formal exercise begins. Think of it as giving your fat cells a few minutes of warning. After 60, this matters more for a specific reason. As we discussed, beta-adrenergic receptor sensitivity declines with age. The signal that opens fat cells becomes weaker. A pre-walk activation sequence is one practical way to amplify that initial signal before it needs to sustain a 25-minute walk. The sequence itself takes 5 minutes and requires no equipment. 30 seconds of slow neck rolls. A minute of shoulder circles, forward and back. 90 seconds of hip circles, both directions, hands on hips. 1 minute of slow standing knee raises alternating. 1 minute of gentle trunk rotations, arms loosely extended. Then begin your walk immediately while the activation response is at its peak.
This is not stretching for flexibility. This is sympathetic nervous system priming. The distinction matters because the mechanism is specific and the mechanism is what you're working with.
And now, number one, the piece that closes the entire loop. Number one, and I promised you this would surprise you, the walk is only half the equation. What determines whether that fasted walk produces lasting metabolic change or whether your body compensates by breaking down muscle tissue instead is what you consume in the 30-minute window immediately after you finish. Here's the mechanism. During fasted exercise, your body is simultaneously doing two things, mobilizing stored fat for fuel and entering a mild catabolic state in which muscle protein becomes an increasingly available fuel source. This winning is particularly pronounced in older adults. Research consistently shows that muscle protein breakdown during fasted exercise is elevated in older adults compared to younger adults performing the same activity, a phenomenon related to what's called anabolic resistance, where aging muscle becomes less efficient at suppressing protein breakdown signals. Why does this matter? Because muscle tissue is your primary metabolic engine. Every unit of muscle mass you preserve keeps your resting metabolic rate higher, your body's capacity to store and burn nutrients healthier. When you lose muscle through aging, through inadequate protein, through fasted exercise without recovery nutrition, your resting metabolism drops and body fat accumulates more easily even without any change in diet. The solution is specific, and the research on this point is reasonably consistent. Consuming adequate high-quality protein within 30 minutes of fasted exercise in older adults appears to suppress muscle protein breakdown and support muscle protein synthesis. The amino acid leucine appears to play a particularly important role in activating the mTOR pathway, the primary intracellular signal for muscle protein synthesis. Practical target, approximately 25 to 35 grams of protein from a leucine-rich source within 30 minutes of completing your walk.
Large whole eggs provide roughly 18 to 19 grams. Adding half a cup of Greek yogurt brings you into the 28 to 32 gram range, depending on the brand. A whey protein shake and water is a rapidly absorbed alternative. Here's the piece that ties everything together. Consuming protein in this window does not appear to negate the fat oxidation benefits of the fasted walk. The insulin response to protein, particularly when consumed without carbohydrates, is more modest than the response to a mixed meal. You get muscle preservation, you extend the period of elevated fat oxidation that follows fasted exercise. Both happen simultaneously when the timing and composition are right. I want to tell you about a composite patient. I'll call him Raymond, 69, former engineer. He had been walking fasted for 6 months and had made real progress, but had hit a plateau. When I reviewed his post-walk habits, he was waiting 2 to 3 hours before eating, usually having a piece of toast. We shifted his protocol. Walk, then 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes, then his normal breakfast an hour later. Within 3 months, his body composition continued improving past the plateau. And you finish, that's where the result either compounds or stalls. So let me bring this back to where we started. You've been walking on an empty stomach every morning, and your belly fat hasn't moved. Now you know why. It wasn't the walk that was wrong. It was the insulin environment around the walk, before it, during it, and after it. Fix that environment, and the same walk you've already been doing becomes a completely different metabolic event. Here's the full protocol pulled together. The evening before, your last food intake, ideally 11 to 13 hours before your walk begins. Water, black coffee, plain tea are fine. Morning, 20 to 30 minutes before walking, 300 to 400 milliliters of water. 5 minutes before walking, the activation sequence, neck rolls, shoulder circles, hip circles, knee raises, trunk rotations. The walk itself, 20 to 35 minutes at a conversational pace. Slightly breathless, full sentences still possible. Outdoors when you can. Within 30 minutes of finishing, 25 to 35 grams of protein from a leucine-rich eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, or whey and water. That's the system. None of it is expensive, none of it requires a gym. And all of it is built around the same underlying mechanism. Giving your insulin enough time to clear, and then protecting the metabolic window that creates. Insulin controls your fat storage, your energy, and your metabolic trajectory as you age. Get your insulin conditions right, and a simple morning walk becomes something genuinely powerful. Type fasted in the comments if you're going to try this protocol this week. I want to know who's starting tomorrow morning. And if you know someone over 60 who has been walking every day without seeing results, send them this video. They may have been doing everything right except the insulin timing. That one piece of context could change everything for them. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the bell. Every week we go deeper on the mechanisms that your annual physical isn't measuring. The next video I'd recommend watching is about the single blood test that predicts metabolic trajectory better than fasting glucose and why most doctors don't order it. All references cited in this video are linked in the description.